Welcome to Gravesend, and thank you for joining us for our story today. Now, if you're a fanatic for the unknown, unfamiliar, and enjoy creepy tales in story format, then this channel's for you. We upload 1 to 2 times weekly, so for more content just like this, don't forget to click that bell to set all notifications, then flip over and hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom. An unexpected twist at the end of the story will entwine your mind and send slivers up your spine. Now on with our story. Today's story takes place in Tampa, Florida, with James and Nicole, who met through a mutual friend their first year in college. James was studying engineering, and Nicole was studying journalism. They hung out a lot, but they didn't really start dating until a year later. James was the quarterback in high school, so he was definitely a sports fanatic. Nicole wasn't really into sports, but she did enjoy going to the college games. The first home game of the season was coming up Saturday, and they were planning to go. Nicole's parents were flying in late Saturday night, so James and Nicole were meeting them early Sunday morning for breakfast. This would be the first time they met James, so it was important he made a good first impression. James hadn't told Nicole yet, but there was a big party planned after the game. He was afraid Nicole would be upset, so he decided to wait until after the game to mention the party. Nicole wasn't really into the party scene and didn't have a lot of time to spend with James, but James did want to go to this party. Nicole was already stressed trying to keep up with her classes and working a full-time job. She worked for a local news network, which took up a lot of her free time, but this job was important to her since her interest was in journalism. Game day had finally arrived. It was the second half of the game, and James was on edge. His team was only leading by a touchdown at halftime. Nicole was saying something to him, but he really wasn't paying attention to what she was saying. He was too focused on the game. Finally, his team picked up 2 more touchdowns for the big win. On the way out of the stadium, he told Nicole about the party, and as he suspected, she wasn't too happy. But she finally agreed to go. She reminded James they had an early morning the next day, and she didn't want to stay too long. This isn't how Nicole planned on spending the rest of her evening, but she didn't want to fight, especially since they were meeting her parents for breakfast the next morning. As soon as they arrived at the party, James started hanging out with his buddies and talking about the game, and Nicole went to hang out with her friends. James and his buddies started taking shots, and it didn't take too long for Nicole to notice he was feeling pretty good. She went over and grabbed his arm to leave, but James was having too much fun. He told her no, he was staying. This didn't set too well with Nicole, and she told him she was leaving, and if he showed up the next morning with a hangover, they were done. James pleaded with Nicole to stay a little longer so they could leave together, but Nicole was adamant about leaving and said goodbye. James promised her he wouldn't stay too late and he wouldn't do anything to embarrass her or himself in front of her parents. James continued drinking, playing beer pong and flip cup until around 3 a.m. when the party ended. He was too intoxicated to drive, and most of his friends were staying overnight. James wanted to go home since he had to meet Nicole and her parents early the next morning. It was a fairly warm night, and he only lived a couple miles away, so he started walking. Short after starting his walk, he got really sick and sat down for a few minutes. He had only been sitting there for a few seconds when he heard a noise coming from the trail behind him and noticed something in the distance. He called out to see who it was, but no one answered. He called out several more times, but each time there was no answer. He realized whoever it was started making their way towards him. As they got closer, he realized it wasn't a someone, it was a something. Panicked, he started to run. He decided it would be quicker to cut through a wooded area to get home, so he did. As he was making his way through the high brush, he heard branches breaking behind him and knew whatever he saw was following him. He continued running and stumbled, almost fell. He managed to catch himself to prevent the fall, but branches were hitting him in the face and across his body, so he brought up his hands to shield his face. He continued pushing through the thick brush and quickly realized this wasn't a good idea. Now he's out of breath and just can't continue the pace. He turned to look behind him, but didn't see anything. He stopped to rest, then began to hear the crackle of brush again. He sat quietly for a minute, looking to see what it was. He hoped it was just an animal, but didn't know what kind of animal it could be. It was tall, walked upright, and way too large to be a man. Then he thought, what about a bear? But no, it's too big to be a bear. Bear or not, he wasn't waiting around to find out. He quickly jumped up and started running again. All of a sudden, he felt a snap on his ankle and began to feel a burning sensation with excruciating pain running up his leg. He had stepped into a bear trap, which didn't make sense. Traps are not legal in Florida, and why would there be a bear trap through here? But James didn't have time to figure out the why. Whatever was chasing him had now caught up and was standing over him. It's dark, he's bleeding, still queasy from the drinking, and he can't tell what this thing is. Whatever it was grabbed his leg and started dragging him. James was in agonizing pain. He started screaming and calling out for help. No one was around, so no one could hear his cries. Fear, shock, loss of blood, whatever it was, caused him to lose consciousness. When he finally woke up, it took him a minute to figure out where he was and remember what had happened. Then fear immediately took over. James felt unbearable pain at the bottom of his leg and sharp pains running up his leg. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he knew he had to do something before he bled to death. The pain was just excruciating. When he looked down at his leg, something was chewing on it. He started screaming and trying to kick his leg to get this thing off him, but he was too weak from all the blood loss. This is when James realized he may not make it out of this. He would never be able to tell Nicole how sorry he was and how much she meant to him. Although he was weak and scared, he still tried to fight and scream for help, but help never came. What seemed like forever had only been a few seconds. The pain was just unbearable, and he just wanted the torture to be over. He pleaded with whatever this thing was to just kill him and be done. So many things were going through his mind. Everything he would never get to do. The people he loved he would never get to see again. His mind then went back to this thing. Whatever this thing was eating his leg was now standing over him. He's looking right at it, but he still doesn't know what it is. He had never seen anything like this before. James was terrified as he stared into its eyes. It raised its hand over its head, and James, seeing it had a weapon. James knew this was the end and prepared himself for the blow. James suddenly woke up and realized it was just a nightmare. He looked up into the bright blue sky and realized he never left the party. He just passed out in the backyard. He started laughing at himself and very happy this was just a dream. He then noticed his foot was really burning and pains were shooting up his leg. When he raised up to look at his leg, he was horrified at what he saw. He started screaming in terror, yelling for help. His friend heard his screams and ran outside. He tried to help James, but there was nothing he could do. As his friend was running back inside to call 911, James was begging him not to leave him. When first responders arrived, they were in shock at what they saw. They had never seen anything like this and wasn't sure what to do. They immediately began emergency techniques, and James fell unconscious. James woke up with people just standing all around him, standing there looking at him, and he was still in excruciating pain. He looked down at what used to be his leg. It's now a large snake. A Burmese python had swallowed his left leg. He looked around at everyone just standing over him and started screaming, "Help me! Help me!" No one responded. The python was over 26 feet long and weighed 210 pounds. He was lucky to be alive. Or was he alive? Although snake attacks are rare, they do happen. So consider this before getting your next pet. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Otherwise, you may have a creepy crawly attached to your leg.